Hey podcasters, it is episode 10 and it is season finale time. But not to worry, Lazy Pod will be back after the summer break. And maybe I'll do some stuff over the summer, who knows. But today on the pod is Dashun Wang. Dashun is an associate professor and the founding director of the Center for Science of Science and Innovation at Northwestern University. He works on the science of science. And doing that, he turns the scientific method upon ourselves, drawing on those amazing new data sets out there and tools from complexity sciences and artificial intelligence. His research has been published repeatedly in journals like Nature and Science, and he has been featured in virtually all major global media outlets. Dashun is a recipient of multiple rewards for his research and for his teaching, including Young Investigator awards, the Poets and Quants Best 40 Under 40 Professors, Junior Scientific Award from the Complex Systems Society, the Thinkers50 Radar List, and more. And in our wide-ranging conversation, we talk about his life, his career, and his new book. So actually, it's too lazy to read the book today. We talk about the book, The Science of Science. But enough jibber jabber, let's get to the show. I like to use this as an excuse to ask personal questions. I've seen your CV, it looks great, but I knew you already when you were a grad student in Boston. We were both at Laszlo Barabáshy's lab. Now you're a grown man, you're part of lists of 40 under 40 and all kinds of things. But I'm interested in even going back before you were a grad student at Laszlo's lab. So how did you end up a grad student at Laszlo's in Laszlo Barabáshy's group?
I went to talk to Laszlo. I saw Laszlo, I was at Northeastern, and the same year Laszlo was in Northeastern, and I saw his website. I was like, wow, that's cool.
Yes.
So I went to talk to him. I didn't know anything about networks, and to this day it remains as a mystery how exactly that he gave me a chance to try it out.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
he's pretty selective, right? Like he only has postdocs almost, and he's very selective. But were you in the physics department? Like, what's your background?
I was in the physics department.
Yes.
And I was just went through the typical training as a physicist. Like I had undergraduate in physics from China for that university, and then I came to the US for a PhD in physics.
Yes.
And, I guess I was lucky in the sense that I didn't quite know what I'm going to study. And then I came in, I was just looking to see what are things out there. And then I stumbled upon Laszlo's website. I was like, wow, I got to talk to him. So I went to talk to him. And I think it should be very clear that I didn't know anything. And I think at least I made that clear through the meeting. That's my only recollection.
Yes.
So I still need to ask him, I think, how that's, what was the fortuitous incidents that he gave me a opportunity. And then I got into the lab. I remember my first day in the lab was Cesar Hidalgo's farewell party. Laszlo doesn't have many postdocs, and then just only few students. And Cesar was, one of the star students. And I remember the party, and they were dancing, and there was drinking involved. And I was like, wow, this is the kind of life that
yes.
that I think I want to be here. So
yes. No, it was a nice lab culture around that time. I'm sure it was also all kinds of other times, but it was kind of, there were so many people there that you could, or it was a good measure because you could get access to Laszlo. There was kind of few enough that you could see him sometimes, but at the same time, there's also so many that you could breathe and you had some space. it's always very scary. I remember when Laszlo kind of puts the laser focus on your project, and then he's like, okay, now, like I'm expecting kind of a rapid turnaround and deliverables, right? Then you knew that stuff would be happening, and you might not be catching up with another episode of The Wire or whatever we used to do off work at that time. But that's awesome. But so now you're an associate professor at Northeastern. So Northwestern. Sorry, it's the drugs I take.
Northwestern, like
it's north. It's north and a direction.
That's right.
Yes. At least yes. There's a country album called Southeastern also. But anyway, now you're at Northwestern. You're in Chicago, the Windy City, or at least very close to it. So what was your journey? So I mean, I've seen the papers, but I know less about how did you then go from being a grad student with Laszlo to where you are now?
Oh, it's been a journey. It's difficult to think about how just life takes you with different turns and with all different kinds of opportunities, and I feel like there's several steps along the way. I didn't quite know what I'm going to get into. So yeah. For sure, when I graduated, and what's interesting, when I graduated, I felt like I learned so much from the lab and from Laszlo and everybody else in the lab. But to be honest, it wasn't clear what I should be doing. It wasn't clear. I think back then, people like us are still a rare breed of some new generation of something, but it wasn't clear what it was. And we didn't quite know either, right? So it wasn't clear, should we pursue a career in the physics department, which doesn't seem like anything that close to mainstream? Should we think about computer science, and that's the time when there's a range of computer scientists has become extremely prolific and prominent.
Yep.
And also some other, maybe social science disciplines. So it wasn't clear. And then I took an industry job. So I went to IBM TJ Watson Research Center, become research staff member. And there's some family history there. Laszlo also started his career at IBM TJ Watson, exactly the same building. That campus has basically been there for a long time. So it's a just great legacy in the place. So I went there and then I joined basically the computer science department there. Mm-hmm. And and I learned so much by hanging out with computer scientists, as published.
What kind of stuff were you working on? What kind of stuff were you working on in that period?
So, I mean, the idea there was, at the time, we were doing, I think, broadly at the time we call big data, right? So you and me, I think both of us. And I think at the time, and that's kind of the umbrella, and it's something that I want to do more. And that was the goal of when IBM was trying to hire me, and they were saying, we want to think about how to use what you did on the big data to help our business side and the clients as well. And sort of that's kind of the research angle, like how do we further the thought leadership in that direction? So then also gradually to see if there's any applicability in solving some of their clients' problems.
Good thing they didn't hire me. That would have been a big problem for IBM in furthering their data science. But anyway,
I met like a range of just fascinating people, and formed a bunch of friendship that last until today, and it was very formative years of my career. So it was fantastic, and but everything's different. I guess that's what I like about it. The only thing that wasn't I would say I wished for more was I didn't get to stay there for long. Not so like several months into the job, then I got an opportunity from Penn State, the information school, and I went for an interview. I remember the interview happened the day after the KDD deadline, so I was working with my colleagues like to midnight, and then I got up to drive like 200 miles to Penn State. And I was like, okay, so I'm just gonna go give a talk and meet with people, and a lot of people that I didn't know. These are people not like at the time, didn't have a lot of network, like in the night side community people, for example. So yeah, so I went to give a talk, and then I think shortly after I left and drove back, I think I was the last candidate, so they had a faculty meeting. So basically, like 2 days afterwards, I got an offer, and I was like, and it was like exploding offer, and so yeah, so and to me at the time it makes sense in the sense that I liked everything I do at IBM, but at the time I also had this itchy feeling that I really want to do this idea that I myself wrote down in my computer called Science of Science. And because I see a lot of things are emerging, and I really want to push on that agenda. And so I think, in order to do that, academia is probably the best place to really try to, because we've got the infrastructure to start our own group and think about our own agenda. So that was the appealing part that I think I wanted to just stay more focused, and which is going to be very difficult to do in the industry lab because I was the youngest member in the group, and I wouldn't know how to handle a group, in that setting. So yeah, so I just decided I'm gonna go to Penn State and start my group. And I started the beginning of 2015, and and it was fantastic. It's a small place. It's a college town, and my wife and I like just basically fall in love with college town. Yes. So we loved our time there. It was fantastic. And then only the problem was, then the only thing I wish for more is like if I can stay there for longer. And then Kellogg came along, and to see if I'm interested in moving to Kellogg. And my first reaction, obviously, as it should be, just like, are you crazy? Like I have no idea what business school is. I am not even remotely related that I can claim myself being expert or anything related to what business school does. So it feels like a very extreme possibility, but I was glad I took I had an open mind. I came over, give a talk, and meet with people, and people are extremely nice and extremely competent and very well respected for whatever they do. So yeah, I'm just very impressed by the place. So then we moved, and
what year was this move?
It was a year later.
Yeah, okay. It was very fast.
2016. 26. Yeah, I was at IBM for a year and a half, Penn State for a year and a half, and we moved 3 months after Alan was born, our first one, and yeah, we've been here since almost 5 years. So,
yes.
Laszlo used to joke that I am now the longest of where I am.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It really is a whirlwind that those because a year and a half goes by so quickly, right? Like kind of it really flies. But both Penn and Kellogg, as I know it, have also really great departments for the kind of things that we do. So it also is a kind of nice flow to have been through, I think. And I mean, I joke that I should never try and help IBM, and that's because that science in some sense is about following the ideas that are beautiful and interesting much more than useful, and industry tends to be more like, let's solve this problem, right? And we start maybe with that idea, but then we go, actually there's a different problem that we can solve in a more satisfying way or whatever. But having said that, I guess IBM really is a kind of more researchy environment, right? And they have many great scientists that keep publishing. So I mean, it's not like you had to go see clients and do billable hours and, you know, solve very concrete problems around that time, right? You still did research.
You know, it is you know, it is a remarkable research institution, and some of the most productive people like did the past years in IBM research, and it does have this structure for people to do that.
Yeah.
And that was the part that I felt, you know, when I joined Penn State, people were like, "Oh, he came back to academia," but I was like, "When did I leave?" Like I didn't feel like I have left. But I also like, you know, I think looking back, I feel like it really benefited me. Was, you know, when I was IBM, I did more than just research. I also like jump at the opportunity to meet with clients, and I flew to client site, which is rarely what people do if you're a researcher. I didn't say no when I was presented that opportunity, and I kept the open mind. And at the time, I didn't know where this is going to lead me. But I looking back, I think a lot of those interactions and experiences, like been very helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But then
you don't really know what's going to be useful. So
no, I totally agree with that. I completely agree that you should kind of do what you can never predict what's going to be useful, and maybe that's also a kind of a theme of research in a way, right? That trying to game what will be interesting is not necessarily easy. But let's maybe get to the research. So it's a really interesting path, and you could say, you kind of mentioned that as you were moving to Penn, you had a research agenda that you wanted to pursue around the science of science, and I think that's a super interesting research area, you know, for many reasons. But for me, primarily because there's such good data. People actually track science. There's clues in there's networks. You can define so many different networks, and there's also tangible outcomes, which we don't see in a lot of places. So what was it? What was the kind of thing you felt like finishing with the science of science, and what about the kind of that path?
That's a great question. I think today we'll focus on thinking about this sort of area that many people now contribute to and identify themselves with. But before I do that, I just want to highlight a true visionary. There was this phenomenal paper before all this data that in Nature that called not Science of Science, but Measures for Measures. Am I getting it right?
Yes, it is very true. But it's because I'm so old that they didn't, you know, like this was the only place you could find data on anything was by going through these old citation databases.
And that was 2006, or what was the paper?
But there are these kind of crazy, you know, like physicists, there is a kind of physics tradition for just crunching numbers, right? So of course, de Soya Price was a physicist also, like I can't remember the years now, but you know, there are these incredible stories that he did the exponential growth of science by stacking his books up against the wall. I think Shockley, who is famous for many things, also had some citation papers, and Sid Redner had also worked. Like I remember there were so few citations back then that I remember, because of course it was impossible to publish this in physics journals. So you had to find every single physicist who had ever touched, you know, a computer screen. So there are kind of some very few data points in the past of physicists doing this. And I mean, and I think there's also a little bit secret sauce about this that we talked about then, which is that the science of science is also great because it's about us. You know what I mean? Like it's a great data set, but it's also, you can see yourself in the paper. You know, if you're reading some abstract thing about food webs or whatever, it can be fascinating. With science of science, you're also going like, wow, how's this about me? And do I have a hot streak? What's happening? But anyway, but thanks for kindly pointing out that yes, that I started out also.
Yeah, I almost turned this around. Like, should I was too lazy to read your paper. Should I interview you?
I can tell you about it. No, but no, I have too many questions for you to turn it around. I have some superb questions, but I want to kind of talk about this path. So what was it? Because you kind of said, I have some unfinished business. I want to start a team and get working on this, right? Those were more or less what you said. So what was it that you felt you wanted to do there? Or what is like, what pulled you in that direction? I mean, and maybe it's just like, I had a couple of ideas, but it could also be deeper or different.
Well, we did, at the time we already finished the first paper in the direction. It's not like we haven't done anything. No. In my last chapter of the dissertation, as you know, when you were in the lab, I was working on mobility, right? I was primarily thinking about intersection between mobility and social network. Basically taking a view that, Marta Gonzalez's phenomenal paper is about individual mobility. So I want to think about, how networks may influence mobility and mobility may influence networks. And for a long time, I thought that's going to be my dissertation. And until toward the end of my PhD, I took, think about, I actually have time to do a new project. So that's where we start to think about sort of this broad idea of success, and that's a lot has been told on the story front. But so that was, but I remember, it's interesting looking back, because when I started, first person I told was Chao Ming, that, who is just basically, we're like hang out all the time. Yes. And, and he was excited, and when we clicked and want to do things together. But other people, I was telling them, like, usually I'm met with a laugh that, are you serious? I think, yes, we're serious in that. I feel there's something there, I want to understand, and the name is Umbrella. It's not like, but it's not, we're not so serious in the sense we didn't quite know what it means to think about what is 100% success. Yes. And, but that was enough to get us going. And we started to just look at the data, what kind of data that captures some proxies for success. And we started with the simplest one, which is citations. And the goal of the project was to say, let's use citations as a test case, and then let's expand it to other things. And then, through the project, we just drill deeper and deeper and deeper. And at the end, we thought, well, just modeling citation dynamics by itself, it is such a hard problem. Like, we just couldn't get our heads around to think about, how do we get these, all the pieces of the puzzle to fit together? We know citations go up and down, but they go different ways. We know there's fat tail distribution, and we know there's exponential growth. How do you all fit this together in a cohesive model, and not only based on like verifiable assumptions? That was enough for us to think through, and then so we decided just to write that up as a paper. And so that was the first paper we published. It was 2013, and then I remember, like, when we started, there was meant to be, this was only a corner of the paper. So even when we started, I knew in my mind there were like so many other things we should explore. Yes. And in science and beyond. And there could be, I also was wondering, there could be also ubiquitous patterns that will apply across domains as well. So I think these are all the question marks in my mind. And now, how do we think about career after we understand citations? How do we think about collaboration? All these, just like, there's so many questions popping up, but I feel like then if I really want to do this, I need to be very focused. So that's kind of what happened then.
but I think that's a super good. I think it's a super good answer, and I think you're right, that it is so rich, right? Because it's the authors are imposing correlations on the citation counts, but the citation counts have feedback up to the authors, and there's so much kind of richness in those dynamics. There's a kind of sociology around it, as we know. And in a way, it's kind of fantastic, right? Because what we never talk about, and we can just say very kind of secretly here, I'll say it so you don't have to, but there is a whole field of kind of citation analysis that existed before science of success, right? Called scientometrics. And part of why I thought in the beginning, like, maybe I shouldn't work on citations, is because that was a kind of very dry and, dare I say, boring field of bookkeeping and, like indicators and so on. And I think also the field was so invigorated, like many other fields, when Laszlo came, you came, Roberta, we also talked to on the podcast, episode 1, everyone. No, episode 2, sorry. Episode 1 is Martha. Yeah, again. Northwestern. You know what I mean. But anyway, and so it's also kind of incredible if you think about it, that there can be, and again, you don't have to answer since this is your work and you don't, but it is incredible that you can have a whole field dedicated to this for many, many years, and then there can still be on top of this richness that you have been working on. But of course, the data has gotten better, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it's an aside. What I want to ask,
Wait, can I clarify on that? That's kind of an important question. I think I need to
yes, please
say a little bit. I appreciate your, but I don't think I can avoid that. Yes, that is in many ways, we're very excited that when I was starting to put together the book, for example, or thinking more about this field, I felt like the beginning of my journey was reading so much of the scientometrics papers. So I'm just extremely grateful that basically these are the soldiers that we can join soldiers we can stand upon. And so that's kind of a pure blessing in a sense. There's so many people have thought through all these questions. And through the way, we also realize there is a very clear focus on metrics, right?
Yes.
So they've done a phenomenal job in thinking about metrics and limitations and how to correct them. I think the question we focus on, we also realize there's this inherent difference in taste and scope and the methods.
Yes.
And almost every aspect. At the same time, I also want to emphasize, it's not just scientometrics who does citation analysis. There's also economics of science, economics of innovation.
Yes.
There are several very well-respected heavyweight economists, as I would say, that's done phenomenal work on understanding the economics angle of scientific interactions, ideas, and where innovation occurs. There is also sociology of science, not to forget, thinking about the phenomenal book by Robert Merton, or the ethnographic work of Harriet Zuckerman. I think the take now for us was to think about sort of standing on the shoulders of all these giants, but then sort of basically bringing two elements that has not been considered fully. One is this just remarkable amount of new data sets are becoming available. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that, the people who came before us didn't take them. We didn't have them either. In a sense, if you look at my lab's work, over the past 5 years, I would say every year, we're surprised by a new data set that we didn't know it could exist the year before. Every year was like that. Even this year, 2021, we published a science paper in the beginning of the year that was relying on a data set just became available on the summer of 2020 that I couldn't even dream that it was possible. So it's every year, it was just, there's so much new data now that's becoming available at a remarkable rate. Yes. And I think that's critical. And second, I think the critical part was also the takeoff of computational tools like deep learning, the embedding methods, as well as, the tools of complexity science, as well as network science. that really offered us a new way, I believe, to sort of scale up a lot of investigations. So I would say, sort of we've definitely been standing on the shoulders of all these giants, but also infuse hopefully some new ideas and thinkings with the blessings of the new data sets and techniques.
Yes, beautifully said. And of course, that's true. I was just trying to be a physicist in my description of the situation. I'm glad you corrected and kind of describe it more holistically, but it is still incredible kind of how then you and Laszlo and Roberta and the people that kind of work in this branch of it have managed to then combine all these pieces to tell some really remarkable new stories in this field that has this rich history. And I think that's a fair assessment. I'm really impressed, and I think there are some nice questions, but now or some really nice questions you answer in the papers, and hopefully we can get into it when we get into the book after this next question. But I have one question that's a very difficult one, so don't answer it if you feel uncomfortable or whatever. But one of the things that is remarkable about you is that you're super successful. Like, you've written tons of amazing papers, right? So Nature, Science, like even COVID, even though you're working Science of Success, you go like, it's changed science. You write a great paper about how COVID has changed science. You have the stuff on early career setbacks, like really masterstroke, and you seem to have, in some sense, cracked the code of consistently coming, like, it's not an accident anymore. You've done it many times. You consistently come up with good ideas. And it's not every person out of Laszlo's lab that kind of makes this transition, right? It's not everyone who interacts with Laszlo. So, like, how did you do it? Like, do you have any thoughts yourself? And I know this is like a difficult question because it's like, what can you say? But I wonder if you have any comments on it anyway.
Oh man, Sune, that's a tough question. Thanks for saying that. I what I'm about to say is going to seem like, appears that I'm being humble, but it's really just what I think. I'm so glad that I'm delighted that you're saying at least I'm not messing things up. So I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. But to be honest, if you put in my shoes when I started at Laszlo's lab, from someone that I didn't know anything to begin with, and sitting next to Chaoming, who's turning out Nature papers every other week.
Yeah, he is a crazy idea who we also have.
Great ideas is like, it's like a fireworks every day.
Yes, I know.
And like every people in the lab, like you, Marta, all these people are around. And then later, Yang Liu joined. All these people are around, and I just felt like, all these role models. I just feel like I'm just lucky to be there and learn from all these people. And that was really what I was thinking. That's why, by the time I graduated, I could like feel like I'm basically a little loser in the sense that, everybody's got their big paper. But when I graduated, all I had was a stack of rejections from Nature, Science, all these places. And then that later motivated my direction of thinking about failure. But, if anything, I felt like I just got so many failures, in the beginning of my career. And I'm glad that I didn't really internalize that I was like, yeah, but I had a great run. I learned so much. And through all this, I'm learning. Every experience is great. Sure, would have been nice if that paper got in with the third round of the review with that second reviewer. But, like, it is what it is. And I feel like I come to terms with it. And,
yes.
And so I never thought about I think everybody's doing fantastic work. I mean, it's nice you are saying it, but you're, doing fantastic work too, including the Nature paper recently you published on the human mobility. And I think you guys continually inspire me, to be honest. So.
Yeah, but I understand it's a compliment, but I think also somehow you really have managed to ask some very, very nice questions in your own papers. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's a good answer. And I think it's true that it is inspiring to work with smart people. And if you can keep learning and keep picking up what's happening, I think that is a really great strategy, right? And I think that the probability of getting a Nobel Prize changes if your advisor is a Nobel Prize winner relative to if your advisor isn't a Nobel Prize winner, right? And that again shows that there is a kind of skill to learning what questions are interesting to pursue and so on, right? I think
correlational, not causal, So there are different explanations. I know it's my friend and colleague Brian Woodsy's paper about them.
Yeah, no, you know the literature better than me. I just know that the probabilities are,
but not causal. We don't know yet if it's.
I'm sure that there is some other variable, and there's something causal in there. Let me. But yes. Yeah, I have to read this paper so that I can update. But I'm glad to be corrected on this. We'll put the link to the paper in the show notes. Very good. Okay, thank you for answering. So now we get to the part of the podcast that this podcast is not a too lazy to read the paper, but it's a too lazy to read the book, because you wrote a book also. So my first question, yes, The Science of Science by Dashun and Laszlo. It's a beautiful book. Congratulations on writing it. And my first question is, what's it like to write a book, right? It's hard already just to write a paper. So how is it to write a book?
I didn't know we're gonna get to that question. Okay, I didn't know that part. I didn't prepare. This is the toughest question. A lot of people come to me and ask me, would I recommend it? I enjoy the process. Let's be clear. I start writing the book. I experienced the escalation of commitments, and I'm in this now. And then I immediately realized, the only reason book as an object exists in the world is because the first-time authors didn't understand how much it takes to write a book.
Yes.
Otherwise, this would not exist. And so it is a painful process. It is a practice of solidarity, and it's a practice of discipline. But I grew to enjoy it, and I took so much out of the writing process. A lot of the ideas was simply because I was reading the literature, and I thought, oh, actually, I wish I want to write a chapter on that, but I didn't have anything, and yes. And I ended up doing research by myself with my team, and so I got it's a extremely rewarding experience. But do I recommend it for people who are at my career stage? And I just want to make clear, no, absolutely no. So it's it is. I think it only works for certain kinds of people that has a certain unique tolerance for risk.
Yes.
And all things considered, because the main thing in early career is still to publish papers.
Yes.
And it was very clear, if I want to finish the book, I had to do both. So it was hard enough to write a book or publish the papers.
Yeah.
And I think that was the main part of just try to push everything along with the 2 newborns that happened in the past 5 years. And so that was the past 5 years. So it's been
And you had two kids with 2 years in between them, right?
That's
And
right.
when you have one baby, I mean, I remember like thinking, how can anyone do anything except just have a baby? Like that seems already full time. And then you had kind of one more after 2 years, and wrote a book. So I was very impressed. Now my next question is, you wrote a book. What's it like to write a book with Laszlo Barabashi? So he, because that's also like a thing. So Laszlo is amazing, and he's generous, and he's fantastic, and he has he has depth, and he more than anyone can smell a good idea long, far away, and polish them and so on. But he's also intense, right? Like I kind of alluded to this, that if you're working with him on something, he would be like, okay, now let's see the living, let's see the things. So what was it like? And of course, only say the nice things and so on, but it must also have added like a layer of expectation and intensity to work with a kind of world superstar who's kind of an intense collaborator.
Yeah, so it's, Lázaro and I had I would say a very special relationship, and
Yeah.
because, I think it's undeniable is, who is the most important to me in my career is Laszlo Barabashi. So
Yes.
it's an honor basically to be able to write a book with him.
Yes.
That's for sure. And then on top of that, as you know, I think what really impressed me with him is he just has this relentless focus on quality and novelty.
Yes.
And he is he's very clear kind about what's the right direction to go.
Yes.
So that's really amazing if you think about it. Like among all the possibilities, like he's usually very good at thinking about this is where we should go, and it's very in a very decisive way. So all of these, and it just makes it this a wonderful experience. And also, it's a wonderful experience in that, we started the project after I left the lab, and so in many ways, it is. He was my PhD advisor, but also, we were never together, and we were always separated apart. And I started my job, but changed my job, and it's in every bit is a very nice collaboration, and I think it's a nice way for us to, in some ways, savor our relationship over the years.
Yeah.
Through these papers. So I like all the bits of that as well. So,
yes.
And he's also at the same time incredibly busy, including writing his own book, for a different audience. And so, he's also very, very busy. So I guess I didn't get so much of the intense part from him because he was just incredibly busy and I was so far away. And I, in some ways, also become busier and busier. Although at much lesser scale, admittedly, and so that's kind of.
No, absolutely.
But it's fantastic.
But it was also
anybody got a chance working with him, highly recommend for sure.
Absolutely, I think I totally agree. I agree with everything you said. But it's because of this relentless focus on quality, and this like the relentlessness is the keyword that I mean, I would love to write a book with Laszlo, but I would also be intimidated. Like when I thought about like, should I say yes, I would also be like, like it would increase the amount of anxiety in my life for a while, probably until once you get into it, it's always fine, right? But you must have been a little bit, kind of thinking this is I guess it also helped you finish the book and be disciplined around it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is, like career is a long game. It's a long time. We're like, you must like me feel old as well occasionally. Like, one phrase I use a lot with my team member these days is like, when I was your age,
Yes.
So I feel like, I feel older by the year. but in the grand scheme of things, career is a very long time. So we're still in the learning phase of a
100%.
career, if you will. So in many ways, I think that's the way I was thinking about this book was, it's my first book, and I'm learning about how to write a book. And I learned so much through the process and through just the practice and through failing, not delivering the kind of chapter I like to read. But these are, I saw this as a learning opportunity. And if I think about this as a learning process, then the Lasso is the perfect companion for me to have on this journey.
Yes.
Absolutely. So that's kind of the way I look. Hopefully then, this is not my last book, but we'll see. So,
yes, no, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And it's nice. And it goes back to this idea of paying attention and learning at every step of the way. And I think if I can just take it one step out, that's what's the most amazing thing about being a scientist is that we can keep learning. And probably when I turn 70, I'll be less creative, I'll be more slow, but hopefully I'll still be learning, right? Like that is the goal of it, right? That's what I would like. But let's now talk more about kind of the content. So I like to talk about all the stuff around, but maybe you can tell us kind of what you alluded to it, but give the reader, assuming that other people have been too lazy to read it, give the reader kind of a view of what are you in for in this book? What did you set out to do? Let's hear.
Certainly. So I hold out the book for people watch on YouTube. This is the book, but I'm not here to sell the book. In fact, I don't know when the podcast will be online, but I hope, I'm almost certain by the time the book will be freely available online. We're just putting everything together now. And that was my goal. Starting the book was I need this to be freely available for everybody, including the text as well as the slides that I sometimes use, so that everybody can take the slides, walk into the classroom or walk into a board meeting or whenever you need this, just use it and everything for free. So that's, what I wanted to emphasize here as well. Yes. But if you do like old school people like me want a physical copy, obviously you can get it from Amazon, but you can also print it out through the PDFs. So
can I just say, I'll say on behalf of the podcast, we support buying this book on Amazon. There's no affiliate link. All the proceeds should go to Dashun, but definitely this is the book is hereby formally endorsed by Too Lazy Pod. Go ahead, sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. So I started the journey by thinking about just the fact that it's such a diverse literature with such a rich historical content, yet at the same time, such a fast development of its new understandings that some were building on the past literature, some were ignoring it. And there's so many past literatures to draw from. Even within the literature, they don't talk to each other in many ways. And these are all non-overlapping readership. And thinking about information science, library science, or economists, or sociologists, computer scientists, and physicists. All these people are publishing in their own corner. And to me, it's first an opportunity to synthesize these rich historical context, and then think about the new developments and how all this fit in, and hopefully also help me understand where all this is going.
Yep.
So that was the main when I started the book. But truth be told, I wrote two versions of the book, and the people who see here is the second version. The first version I wrote the book, I think that can be characterized by a review paper instead of a book, because the first version of the book, I wrote it basically for researchers who may want to do science of science.
Yes.
So that was the first version I had to think about the book. And I wrote a lot of them, and I synthesized a lot of literature and spent a lot of my time working on that. And until I realized that was not the right approach. I think that approach would have succeeded I think people in the field would love me more if I publish that version of the book, because everybody's work is carefully indexed and their names being called out. Like so and so did this in collaboration with so and so. I think some people in the field may like more that version. But to me, that was not the right version, because what I realized is just like what you said, is the reason people really like Science of Science is because this is about science. This is about, the passion that every scientist has. So if we can, after we turn our scientific curiosities and methods on the science of itself, after we learn something new about the patterns that governs the evolution of science, a lot of times we feel this has immediate relevance for the practitioners of science, namely scientists, to think about as they're in this complex systems that grow in its complexity and scale with the growing physical scarcity. So, and so that's where I realized, I shouldn't be writing this for like my close friends, like, Roberta Sinatra or any other my friends, is that they will buy the book and read the book anyway, and they will know most of this stuff. So what I think the real opportunity for Science of Science is to open up this insight and then write it in a way, for every scientist, so that every scientist will be able to understand at a level that's accessible to everyone, but also they will take away distilling lessons from these large-scale data sets and models and insights, and hopefully that'll better some of their practice. So that was this. Then I script everything, had a new folder called the write_new, and everything from so that also means I'm sort of deleting a lot of literature that would otherwise not been relevant for thinking about if a scientist doesn't do this kind of research, then some of them necessarily then become not as relevant. And so that was a painful process, obviously, cutting things. And but I think I like the second version, the eventual version, better than the first version. Although I can understand there would be people who would like the first version better.
Yes, sure.
So,
but let's talk about the writing, right? Because this is also like part of why Laszlo's a genius, and part of why I think that you're so good at writing papers and what you learn from him is also telling good stories, right? And even in a paper in a very dry form, you can tell the paper in a boring way, or you can frame it the right way, and you can make it storytelling in the paper. And so what you're telling me now is that you're kind of taking the review paper version of your book, which is just like a massive review paper, and now you're converting it to something that's more storytelling. And you gave some clues. You said something along, see, I made notes here. You said something like, focus on the lessons, right? Rather than the attribution. So can you talk a little bit about the storytelling, the part of like going from one version to the other, about making a book that's more about insights? Can you be more concrete? Because I'm just interested. I also like writing and stories and so on. So maybe talk a little bit about how do you go from write to write_new, or whatever the folder was called?
Well, let me give you some examples. And I think that's something that we can cover today without slides. And I can just talk about, a few things I feel I learned when I look at literature and models in that lens, through that lens. Like one example you mentioned, William Shockley, for example, is this remarkable figure. He's, Nobel Prize winner, invented the transistors, brought the silicon to the Silicon Valley, founded Silicon Valley. And, but he was, also, for disclaimer, his career also has a lot of controversies, and that I also discussed in the book. But one interesting paper he published was 1950s, where he was the head of the national lab. and he was looking at all the people he managed to say, like, what's the productivity difference between these people, right?
Yes.
And that's where the storytelling, where I think network scientists in particular are familiar with the Paul Erdos, who published more than 1,500 papers. Yes. Give and take, the real number is still growing in some sense currently.
Yeah.
But but like the question then is, if you think about literature, usually the question is about, okay, what's the distribution of number of papers? Okay. Yes. And so this is a question, but this is also a question, aside from the distribution, it's a question every scientist care about. We look at other people's Google Scholar profile, and every time we wonder, how can this person be so productive? Yes. How can this person be so much more productive than me? And I think that's an interesting question, because we all have 24 hours and we got to sleep 7 to 8 hours according to science. Otherwise we go crazy. Yes. And you got to exercise, you got to eat, you got to, do random stuff. So how come then there's such a big difference? And that was precisely what Shockley questioned. And so he measured productivity difference and finding that this productivity distribution is a log normal distribution, which is a typical class of fat tail distribution. So that means most people have very few papers every year, but then they're very productive people on the tail end who are like Paul Erdos. Okay, and this is where he immediately, back to 1950s, had this remarkable insights, is that if we think about this as a productivity, then it's very odd, because most performance measures are narrow peaked. We don't run like 7 times faster than another person. We speak in terms of number of words. We don't. Yeah. It's not that deep. So why is that? So that's where he came in with a model and thinking about what I call the hurdle model. The idea is to say, what are processes that can generate log normal distribution? Is the multiplicative process. Yes. Okay, then if you think about publishing, is like a clearing up different hurdles of thinking about, hurdle 1 is, do you have a good idea? Do you have the funding to do it? Do you have the good talents? Do you have, the skill sets? And can you write? Can you profit from criticism from reviewer tools? And do you have a determination to finish? A large number of variety of factors. And then that's where he realized, if you think about like publishing is all needs to cross different hurdles in a multiplicative process, then this would explain the log normal distribution. So I would have stopped here if it's just first version of the book. But in fact, if it's just first version of the book, I probably wouldn't even include this, because this is kind of old literature. It's not state of art. It's not the main focus of research. But it was prominently featured in the book because I feel what is profound is to think about the implications from this model. If this is true, then what it means, right? So there is, I think, a couple of implications. I think one thing I learned immediately is to think about, okay, my own practice, I do the comparisons too. I look at other people, I admire them, I say, well, how can this person be so productive? But when I compare with others, or thinking about how do I improve my own work, I usually focus on one factor. I say, oh, that's because that person is very good at storytelling. I say, oh, that person is very good at writing, or oh, that's a math genius. Yes. But what the hurdle model is telling us is usually this is not just one factor, but multiple factors. If you are twice as good as factor A, B, C, H, then you're 8 times more if you multiply them together. So it really helped me develop this multi-factor view. And I sort of think about diagnosis is that if you want to improve your own productivity, at least for me, I start to think about, okay, so there's so many components. I shouldn't just focus on just one direction. If I actually can improve a little bit on all these directions, then, if they multiply on that, maybe quite useful. And there are other implications. For example, implications for reward. And this was written by Shockley as well, is to think about, but if individual output is multiplicative, but the salaries are all additive. Within the organization, you don't have someone who paid like 8 times more than others. So then that means there's a discrepancy that maybe can be exploited. And in fact, that's actually often cited when universities try to give their star employees disproportionate amount of perks and benefits. And this was often cited. I think this is where the second version of the book try to focus. And I think that this is an example that shows sort of have a different focus on what we talk about. Also, it has a different focus on what kind of a literature we would sample, you know?
Yes.
So that also means that necessarily I would also miss some of the literatures that I would have sampled in the first version of the book. So yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think it's interesting, and in a way, it's also you sharing your great ideas for new papers and things to look for, right? Is you're saying this is somewhere where it'd be interesting to look. But anyway, let's talk about one last thing, which I think you probably also have opinions on, and I think is kind of important just to think about, which is part of the metrics part of scientometrics. Like your work in a way is about figuring out how does things work, what is it that shapes us and drives us and shapes careers, and what are the mechanisms, social and individual and so on, that shapes things. But there is also kind of the dark side to metrics that's like, okay, but now you have an H index, so now we're just going to hire based on that. So what are your thoughts on and I think, you know, like this ties into the whole AI bigger picture. And I think I'm personally very split on it, because in the same, like people are completely unfair. People make biased decisions, and it's hard to make good decisions. It's impossible to read all the papers. But what are your thoughts on the kind of the metrics and the use of the metrics, and how can we do that in your view in the best possible way to kind of take the good and avoid the bad of this?
Yeah, so I see, you know, every progress has growing pains, you know. Just like, you know, beginning of that 20th century, the cars were invented and they kill people, you know, and they kill people at a higher rate than the horses.
Yes.
And but if that's the only criteria, we say we shouldn't use it, then we're denying progress.
Yes.
You know, I think it's important to separate progress and growing pains. And with every metric, and there's the well-known Goodhart law and all this stuff about unintended consequences. And this is in general for human behavior. You institute a policy, people get around it, and then they will.
Yes. 100%.
But I think, you know, the idea of, you know, if evaluation were all subjective, and the question is, if we have some numbers and some way of quantifying it, and with tightened estimates on uncertainty as with models,
yes,
would that help all this subjective evaluations? Because subjective evaluations are not going away. You know, if I evaluate somebody else's tenure, I'm going to read the papers and form my opinion.
Yes,
you know, if I'm asked to write a letter, I'm not gonna just look up a Google Scholar, because then they don't need me, right? No. So then the question is, you know, can all these decisions being augmented and assisted by a growing range of quantitative understandings? And I think the answer is yes. So that's kind of my view on this. And it's the same as AI. You know, I think the AI example is interesting to think about. Okay, all these biases and what do we do? And you know, AI community doesn't say, oh, this is why we shouldn't do AI. You know, this is the question we got to figure out. We're going to spend effort. Yeah. But one thing I want to make clear is that I think the very fact we talk about this means these quantitative understandings are gaining a solid footing. They are providing value. Otherwise, we would just ignore them. Just the way, why do we care about the biases in AI? Because a lot of their predictions are remarkably accurate and reliable. That's why we rely our decisions on that. And similarly, I think this is a promising sign of thinking about science of science is, why do we want to think about responsible metrics? It's just because these metrics are useful and people find they're insightful in different ways. And now we want to do it better. So.
Yes, no, but I'm completely with you that it's about finding a balance, and that humans, and I mean, there's a Kleinberg paper about decisions in the New York courts, and where you basically show, like even a totally biased algorithm who makes decisions is way better than the super racist humans that are making decisions, right? So I think it's about doing this in a clever way and getting better at it. And I think I agree that using the insights is interesting, and also the thing you said about understanding the margins of error is incredibly important, right? Because one of the things that we also know is that there is an enormous amount of stochasticity in this system. And early on, like the error bars are pretty big on our predictions, even if your advisor is a Nobel Prize winner and you've written a paper on your own in Nature or whatever. Like everything that looks good, it can still go in many directions, and there's a lot going on outside. So finding a way to kind of using that information, but in a responsible way, that's the path forward. So
right, and I think that point on the sort of error bars and sort of the error estimation point is precisely, I think, a lot of the contributions of this recent, more computational literature of the science of science was able to do, was to develop all these models that are well validated outside of the field and sort of bring them in and to think about these processes with model-driven insights.
Yes.
And in some ways, I think the metrics, scientometrics traditionally has been sort of focused on very much on metrics. Something you hear often in that community is, oh, if it's not metrics, then it's not interesting. Yes. So very much in metrics, but the metrics are often in a way that's like Excel spreadsheet, counting, let's sum them up, some average, control for field, or some control. Yeah. So I think that's a very different flavor when you think about, okay, what is the mechanism behind this evolution of the metric, And I think that's to me, it's a conceptual leap. But this conceptual leap is often missed because, I also often get the feedback from that community, scientometrics, for example, is that, we don't have the mathematical background to actually understand your model. Yeah. So then what happens is that then it's easily dismissed, that part. If I read a paper, the parts I don't understand, I just ignored it. As if it didn't exist. So, and I think that may have also contributed to some misunderstanding that, oh, we're just studying citations. It wasn't the intention. I think counting citations is very well studied.
No, so absolutely. But it's like, but there are, I totally agree. And there are some findings. I mean, the one that leaps to mind, because I don't know the literature that well, is like when I talked to Roberta, right, in her model, and I think you're also on the paper, there's this 3x3 matrix, and basically you can see that it just decouples, that there's a 2x2 matrix of covariance, and then there's the kind of the one factor that decouples, right? And that's data driven, and it's fascinating, right? That it's there, and it's just one example of a kind of an insight that comes from kind of careful analysis, and also from forming theories about mechanisms in this field. So awesome that you are all kind of working on this and helping make it better. Hang on. All right. So in my phone, I don't know what's going on, but it's been, I tried to silence it, but I failed. It's been amazing to talk to you. Thank you for kind of taking the time. It's been, I think it's been really wonderful and so, sort of hearing all this. So thanks for being on the podcast, and thanks for chatting.
Oh, thanks for having me. Thank you.
Moving forward.